Have you ever stood inside your childhood home and felt like a stranger? I hadn't planned to stay in Connecticut after the funeral. My return ticket to Chicago was still in my bag. But then, the will was read. To Lindsay Morgan, the family estate, remaining assets, and 72% of company shares. No one flinched, but I knew something was wrong. Because the week Grandpa supposedly signed that will, he was in the ICU, unconscious. I was there every night. I'm Rachel, the granddaughter who renovated the cabin with him, who stayed, who listened. He always said, "What I built, you'll carry forward." Then why did I get nothing but a sealed letter? Inside, just 2 words, "Ask Elliot." That led me to a hidden USB, an old video of Grandpa, his voice shaking but clear. If you're watching this, someone overrode my final will. Rachel, I named you the successor because you were the only one who stayed. This isn't just a story about a forged will. It's about confronting betrayal with proof. It's about legacy, integrity, and choosing truth when silence is more convenient. If you've ever felt erased from your own story, you need to hear what Grandpa really left behind. Before we dive into the story, let me learn a bit about you. If you're a charming lady, please leave the number 1 in the comments, and if you're a dashing gentleman, leave the number 2. This way I can send you a special greeting. Now, let's start the story together. I hadn't planned on staying in Connecticut after the funeral. My return ticket to Chicago sat folded in the side pocket of my purse, still crisp, still hopeful. But funerals have a way of prying open things that were never supposed to be touched. And wills? Wills make sure nothing stays buried, not even the parts of people you loved most. The waiting room of Delaney and Associates felt more like a mausoleum than a law office. Dustless shelves lined with law books no one had read in a decade, a too loud clock ticking near the door, and the scent. Lemon polish and something older, like smoke trapped in wood. I sat in the farthest chair from my parents, one hand around a lukewarm cup of coffee, the other brushing over the frayed hem of my coat pocket. Inside it, Grandpa Henry's pocket watch, still ticking. Elaine sat perfectly straight, fingers laced like she was in church. Dad adjusted his collar every few minutes, clearing his throat at nothing. And Lindsay? Lindsay wore ivory, a knit dress too light for late September, but just fitted enough to look deliberate. She kept looking at the window like something better might be happening outside. Frank Delaney walked in with that permanent smile of his, one that never quite reached the eyes. "Thank you all for being here. I know this has been a difficult time." He didn't mean it. He meant, let's get this over with. He opened the file slowly, reading like he was narrating a bedtime story. To my beloved granddaughter, Lindsay Morgan, I leave the family home on Willow Lane, the remaining trust balance, and my 72% shareholding in Whitestone Tools. No gasp, just silence, the kind that settles too deep into the carpet. My stomach didn't drop, it clenched. Grandpa had told me for years, what I built, you'll carry forward. Not Lindsay, me. Frank cleared his throat. To my granddaughter, Rachel Morgan, I leave a sealed personal letter to be opened privately. He passed me an envelope. No assets, no mention of the cabin he and I spent 2 summers restoring, no reference to the Whitestone internship he'd personally arranged for me, just a letter. I looked up. That's it? Frank smiled, but his hands were fidgeting, finger tapping against thumb like he was counting down. My parents didn't look at me. Lindsay crossed her legs and leaned back like she already knew. Of course she knew. I forced the words through the tightness in my throat. When was this version of the will signed? Frank flipped a page. August 22nd, 2022. I blinked. Grandpa was in ICU that week. I knew because I was there. Every night after work, I sat beside him, reading aloud from the business section and holding his hand when the tremors got bad. On August 22nd, he was unconscious from the morphine. I leaned forward. That doesn't line up. Frank's smile faltered. Hospitals can be stressful environments. People often finalize decisions during moments of clarity. I held his gaze. He couldn't sign his own name. Dad finally spoke. Rachel, not everything needs to be a confrontation. And not everything needs to be a cover-up, I shot back. Mom sighed like I'd embarrassed her. Again, like this was a performance and I'd missed my cue. Frank stood, smoothing his tie. I'm afraid that's all the documentation I have to share. The estate will begin transfer procedures within the next 60 days. I didn't move. Neither did the letter in my lap. They left before I did. Lindsay kissed the top of Mom's cheek. Dad murmured something about dinner on Sunday. The door closed behind them with a heavy click, and I was alone. I stared at the envelope. My name was written in Grandpa's shaky scrawl. No return address, no date, just Rachel. I opened it. Inside, one sheet of linen paper, folded once, and in the middle, in blue ink, Ask Elliot. That was it. No apology, no explanation. Just 2 words, looping slightly at the tail of the T. I read it twice, then a third time. The name didn't ring a bell. Not a cousin, not one of the Whitestone board members I'd met. I tried to picture Grandpa's voice saying it. Ask Elliot. The words felt like a riddle, or maybe a warning. I looked down at the letter again, then at the ticking watch in my pocket. Grandpa's last words to me weren't, I love you or I'm proud of you. They were a breadcrumb. I folded the letter carefully, every crease deliberate. The watch ticked against my fingers, soft and steady. Some betrayals echo loudest in silence. And this silence felt deafening. Who the hell was Elliot? I didn't cry when I heard about the inheritance. I didn't cry when I opened that envelope and saw only 2 words. I didn't even cry in the car afterward, staring at the pale sky reflected in the windshield. But today, mid-October, pumpkin spice in the air, the house dressed in seasonal wreaths and artificial warmth, I nearly broke over pecan pie. Mom had gone all out. Cloth napkins folded like swans, cinnamon sticks tied with ribbon at each place setting. She called it a little fall brunch, like we were just catching up, not skating over betrayal. I sat at the table between a bowl of roasted squash and a platter of scones, the air thick with maple syrup and tension. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. Elaine filled my glass with apple cider like nothing had changed. David nodded once when I arrived, then didn't look at me again. Lindsay chirped about yoga retreats and engagement parties, her smile stretched too wide, her fork tapping politely against the china. I took a bite of cranberry scone and almost laughed. We were all pretending. I cleared my throat, trying to keep my voice steady. I've been thinking about what Grandpa wrote. David shifted. Elaine's hand froze on the pie server. Lindsay blinked, like the name Grandpa required translation. I continued. The letter he left me, it said, Ask Elliot. Do any of you know who that is? Elaine was the first to move. She sliced the pecan pie carefully, placing each piece on dessert plates as if they might shatter. Rachel, sweetheart, I think you're dwelling. It's a fair question, I said, watching her hands. You were listed in the will. Maybe you came across the name. Lindsay shrugged, already reaching for her slice. You still have that little studio in Chicago, right? I saw someone post a rooftop pic near you last week. Cute view. Deflection. Smooth, practiced. Elaine slid a plate toward me. Let's not turn brunch into an interrogation. We're still family. Still family. The words landed like a paper cut. Small, sharp, and unnecessary. I'm not trying to start anything, I said. I just want to understand how Grandpa's intentions changed so drastically while he was in the ICU. David's jaw tensed. People change their minds. Not when they can't hold a pen, I replied. The silence stretched, only broken by the soft scrape of a fork on porcelain. Elaine sipped her cider, then folded her napkin neatly in her lap. Lindsay leaned back. You always were the intense one. Grandpa probably just didn't want to burden you. Burden me? With the company he spent his life building? The cabin we renovated together over 2 blistering summers? The late nights we spent talking about integrity and long-term vision? Elaine stood and carried the empty pie plate to the kitchen, her voice light but firm. "You're welcome to visit any time. The house is always open." The house. The one she used to say we'd renovate together one day. The one she promised I'd inherit when she talked about keeping it in the family. I looked around. Not one photo of me on the walls. Just Lindsay and her fiancé. Lindsay and a poodle I'd never met. Lindsay on a boat somewhere expensive. I pulled out my phone under the table and texted Frank Delaney. "Can you send me a copy of the original will?" His reply came faster than expected. The original was amended for clarity. No copies remain per Mr. Morgan's directive. Amended for clarity. I stared at the words. Whose clarity? My phone buzzed again. Jenna. "Want to crash at mine? You don't sound okay." I typed a quick thank you and put the phone away. It was too polite a room for reality. I stood up not long after, claiming an early train. No one protested. Lindsay waved vaguely. David muttered something about safe travels. Elaine offered me leftover pumpkin bread. Outside, the air was crisp, the kind that hints at snow even before Halloween. Leaves scuttled across the driveway like they were trying to escape. I walked past the house I'd grown up in, the front door painted a cheerful red, the porch swing creaking faintly in the wind. My car was parked just past the mailbox. I reached for the handle, then paused. My name was still on the side of the mailbox, R. Morgan. But someone had scratched it out in pen, just one hard line through the middle. As if erasing me didn't even require effort. I didn't cry when they took the money. But standing there, in front of the house they once promised me, looking at that scratched name, I felt something unspool quietly inside me. If I was no longer family on paper, what else had they quietly erased? New England in November isn't just cold, it's the kind of cold that seeps into your ribs, even when the sun is shining, the kind that feels like silence. And that morning, as I stood on the front porch of my grandfather's old house, my breath fogging in the air, my keys clenched in my pocket, I realized something. This wasn't just about a will, this had been planned. The gate creaked like it remembered me. The porch groaned under my boots, but the door didn't open until the third knock. Mr. Calvin answered with a hesitant squint. His face, creased with age and patience, looked thinner than I remembered. "Miss Morgan," he said carefully, "didn't expect anyone." "I called last night. Elaine said I could stop by and gather some of Grandpa's things." He didn't nod, not quite. Just opened the door wider and stepped aside. "They said you might come. Didn't say when." Inside, the air was dry and undisturbed, like time had stopped the moment Grandpa passed. The fireplace was cold, and the familiar scent of lemon oil and tobacco had faded, replaced by something brittle and dusty. "I won't be long," I said, more to myself than to him. He didn't answer, just disappeared down the hallway toward the kitchen. I wandered past the living room, trailing my fingers along the back of Grandpa's worn leather chair, pausing in front of the mantel where our old family photos used to sit. Only one remained, Lindsay on a yacht, smiling into the sun. The study door was closed, of course. It always had been. Grandpa had a rule, never go in unless you were invited. I remembered how he used to say, "Some things don't need explaining until they do." Today, I needed explanations. The doorknob turned stiffly, but it wasn't locked. Inside, the study looked untouched. Dark wood bookshelves towered on either side, their spines familiar. Law journals, business ethics, economic theory. The desk sat under the window, dust settling on the brass lamp. And his chair, the one he'd spent countless hours in, still faced the wall like he'd just stepped out. I sat down slowly. My fingers hovered over the top drawer. It slid open with a groan, revealing only papers, receipts, legal pads, ink pens. The second drawer held folders, corporate bylaws, annual reports. I flipped through them, methodical but distracted. Nothing unusual. Then I saw it. a heavy book near the edge of the shelf, slightly pulled out from the others. Federal Tax Law 1991. Grandpa hated that volume, always said it was outdated and poorly organized, so I keep it here, separate. I pulled it out. It was hollow. Inside the cutout center, a small black USB drive, no label, just dust and plastic. My pulse slowed. Dear friend, what would you do if you were in my shoes? I bet you can't guess what's coming next. But before we go any further, drop a 5 in the comments if you're still with me, because what happens next might just leave you speechless. Back in the study chair, I opened my laptop, an old one I hadn't used since grad school, running slow but steady. I slid the drive in, heard the soft click, and waited. 2 files. One was a video, the other a folder titled Version A. I clicked the video first. The screen lit up with his face, Grandpa Henry. His eyes were tired but clear. The background was unmistakable, this very study in softer light. He was wearing his navy cardigan, the one he always brought out after Labor Day. I hadn't heard his voice in over a month, but when it came through the speakers, it was exactly as I remembered. "If you're watching this," he said, "then someone overruled my final will." I leaned forward. I trusted Frank to file the correct version. I made revisions in September. "Rachel, I named you the primary beneficiary for the family business, the equity in the property, and the bulk of my remaining assets. Not because I love you more, but because you were the only one who listened, who asked questions, who stayed." He paused, took a shaky breath. "I expect this won't sit well with your parents or your sister, but I've watched the way they speak when they think you're not listening. The way Lindsay talks about profit instead of people. The way Elaine files away control like it's a family heirloom. This house, the legacy, it was never about inheritance. It was about stewardship." I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath. "You'll find a folder on this drive. I named it Version A. Use it however you see fit." He looked straight into the camera then, and I swear for a second it felt like he was still here. "I trust you, Rachel, and I'm sorry you had to find out this way." The screen went black. I clicked on the folder. Inside, one document. Scanned, high resolution. The first page bore the title, Last Will and Testament, revised September 17th. I scrolled through, reading every line. My name again. Business shares. Property. The Connecticut house. A small fund to Elaine and David for comfort. A modest stipend to Lindsay. Nothing like what she ended up with. I pulled up the document's metadata, created September 18, 2022, 11:09 a.m., modified September 18, 2022, 11:14 a.m., location, home office, Henry Morgan. It was dated a full week before the version Frank Delaney submitted to probate. My hands didn't shake, not this time. I copied everything, twice. One for the lawyer I hadn't hired yet, one for the fireproof safe I bought that afternoon. There's a certain kind of silence that feels too loud for a city like Boston. Not the kind born from absence, but from restraint, like a held breath that never quite lets go. It was a windy afternoon in mid-November when I found myself walking up the narrow, brick-lined slope of Beacon Hill. The air was dry, the kind that cracked your lips before you even realized you were thirsty. Heritage Grounds sat at the corner of a historic block, wedged between an antique bookstore and a tailor's shop that looked like it hadn't updated its window display since 1978. Inside, the smell of dark roast and lemon oil hit me like memory. A low hum of conversation filled the space, but everything felt soft, like the world had agreed to speak in lowercase. I chose a table in the back, beneath an old sconce shaped like a ship's lantern. The espresso here was brutally strong, like it had something to prove, but the mahogany walls muffled the outside noise. It felt like the kind of place where secrets could sit down, order coffee and not be questioned. Elliot Harper arrived precisely at 3:00 p.m., just like he'd said. Mid-60s, pressed collar, clean hands, and an expression like he'd seen more than he'd ever say out loud. He reminded me of an old professor, one who had once believed rules were sacred, but now understood why people broke them. "You're Rachel," he said, sliding into the chair across from me without ceremony. "You look like your grandfather." I nodded. "You knew him long." Well enough to know when he meant what he said, and Henry always meant it. We sat for a moment without speaking. He stirred his coffee with a wooden stick, then folded his hands neatly over the napkin. "I notarized Henry's final will on September 18th, he said, voice low. "We sat at his desk, same one he's always had. He told me you were the intended successor. He used that word exactly. Successor. Not just beneficiary." I exhaled, not relief, just confirmation. "Then you'll understand why I'm confused," I said, sliding a small envelope across the table. Inside was a copy of the will Frank Delaney had submitted to probate. This is what the court received. Elliot opened the folder and began scanning the pages. I watched his eyes tighten. "This isn't what I stamped." "Exactly." "The formatting's different. Signature block is misaligned, no notary seal, and the witnesses—" He paused, leaning closer. "These aren't the people I remember seeing that day. This isn't the same document." "I found the original in Henry's study," I said. "Metadata matches. I have the file and the video." His brow lifted slightly, a flicker of respect. "You're doing your homework." "I'm doing what he asked." He stared at the will in silence, then nodded slowly. "I'll testify," he said finally. "You'll need someone who saw the truth before it was erased." I expected hesitation. What I got was clarity. "Why?" I asked. "Why help me?" "Because Henry believed in the weight of intent, and because I've seen Frank Delaney's name attached to too many stories that end in silence. Someone should have spoken up a long time ago. Maybe now's the time." He took a long sip of his espresso and set it down. "But understand this. You're not just fighting a signature. You're exposing a strategy." I blinked. "This wasn't accidental," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "If Frank and your family submitted a forged will, they did it with layers. Legal insulation, emotional distractions. They knew what they were doing, and they counted on you being too sad, too polite, or too tired to fight." The words sat heavy between us, but they didn't scare me. They clarified me. We parted without shaking hands, just a look that said, "This isn't over." That night, I drove home in silence. The streets were already glittering with early holiday lights, but they felt out of place, like someone was decorating a wound. When I pulled into my apartment complex, a voicemail waited on my phone. It was from Lindsay. Her voice was tight, not angry, just overly controlled, like she'd rehearsed each line in the mirror. "Hey, Rachel, Mom said you've been digging. I just want to say, none of this really matters anymore. Grandpa's gone. We all lost something. Maybe it's time to stop looking for villains." She paused. "I mean, you still have your little studio. You're doing okay, right?" It wasn't the words. It was the tone. A soft push disguised as concern. A reminder of how often she'd called my ambition cute. How many times I'd been told to be grateful for crumbs from a table I helped set. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone in one hand, Henry's old pocket watch in the other. I hadn't really looked at it before, hadn't had the courage. The brass was worn, but the hinge still clicked cleanly. And on the back, barely visible in the low light, were 5 engraved words. Integrity over inheritance. HM. That was the compass, not money, not property, but choice. And maybe that's what they didn't count on, me choosing differently. I didn't reply to Lindsay's message. I didn't need to. Instead, I composed a new email. No greeting, no explanation, no subject line, just the attachment. Last will Morgan version, and I hit send. Some families only understand boundaries when they're filed in court. The second Monday of February bit down hard on Cambridge. Wind howled between buildings like it had a score to settle. I stepped over half-melted snowbanks and frozen slush puddles with the kind of care you only learn after falling flat once or twice. My fingers were red, the cuticle on my left thumb raw from anxious picking. Jenna had offered to come, even made me tea that morning, but I told her no. This wasn't a hand-holding day. This was a folder in hand, jaw set, no turning back kind of day. Miles Chen's law office sat on the third floor of a granite building near Harvard Square, an odd mix of academia and ambition. Inside, the walls were paneled in light oak, the floors muffled in navy carpet, and every surface smelled faintly of citrus and copier toner. The waiting area was quiet, sterile, and humming with the artificial warmth of fluorescent lighting. I sat for maybe 2 minutes before a paralegal with squared shoulders and clipped heels called my name. Miles stood when I entered the conference room. Early 40s, wireframe glasses, a navy wool suit that looked tailored but not flashy. He extended a hand with a kind of calm assurance I hadn't felt in months. "Ms. Morgan," he said, "I've reviewed the materials you uploaded. Impressive organization." I slid the USB across the table. "There's more on here. Metadata logs, the scanned version of Henry's original will, the video message, and the notarized statement from Elliot Harper." He nodded, inserting the USB into a sleek silver laptop. "Let's take a look." As he clicked through folders, I sat perfectly still. My palms itched, but I kept them flat on the table. I watched his expression, subtle furrowing of the brow, a tap of the pen against his thumb, a moment's pause when he reached the video. Henry's voice filled the room, slightly grainy like it had been recorded on an old camcorder. Miles watched the whole thing, then leaned back. "This isn't just compelling, it's damning," he said. "Between this and Mr. Harper's affidavit, we have grounds to file a formal motion to contest the will. Fraud and document suppression are serious charges." "I'm not looking for a circus," I said, "just for the truth to live where it belongs, on record." His eyes met mine with something like approval. "Then we'll proceed strategically. No theatrics, just the facts." He spent the next hour walking me through the process: motion, discovery, depositions, hearings. Each step came with caveats and contingencies. But the spine of the case was strong, he said. Intent, timeline, chain of custody, and most of all, motive. Before I left, he added, "They'll respond, emotionally, legally. You should prepare for that." He was right. 2 weeks later, I came home to a thick envelope waiting by the mail slot, my name typed in precise block letters. Inside, a formal response from my parents' legal team. Their counterclaim alleged emotional distress, reputational damage, and undue influence. I read it 3 times. Every phrase felt like it had been boiled down in acid, distilled into a version of me I didn't recognize. I didn't cry. But I sat on the floor for a long time, back against the coat closet, the folder spread open across my lap. Later that night, Jenna dropped by with soup. I hadn't told her, but she seemed to know. "They're trying to rattle you," she said softly. "It doesn't mean they're right." "They used to tell me I was the calm one," I whispered. "Now I'm a threat." She didn't answer, just stayed with me as I stared at nothing. The next morning, Lindsay sent a text. Just one line. "You were always the outsider. You just didn't notice." I read it while standing in the elevator of my building, and for a second the fluorescent lights felt too bright, too loud. I thought about childhood birthday parties where I was handed the store-brand cupcake while Lindsay got the bakery one, about college tours where Mom clutched her arm tighter than mine, about Henry's steady hand on my shoulder the day he told me, "One day, you'll have to hold the line they refuse to see." I didn't respond. Some things don't need replies. They just need boundaries. Miles scheduled a preparation meeting for the upcoming deposition. Back in the same room, same table, he handed me a packet of mock questions. His tone never changed, but his words had a different weight now. Be precise. Be calm. Be the adult in the room. I read the questions, then read them again. Some were barbed, clearly designed to paint me as ungrateful, manipulative, vengeful. But others were fair. My job now was to answer with clarity, not emotion. That afternoon, a letter arrived from the probate court. Hearing scheduled May 3rd, 2023. Motion accepted, evidence filed. I held the envelope in both hands, tracing the seal like it might dissolve if I touched it too hard. The world outside was still frozen. Cars dusted in salt, sidewalks crunchy with ice. But inside me, something warmed. Not joy, not revenge, clarity. I sat at the kitchen table, folder in front of me, and read every page slowly. I thought about the version of myself that had walked into Henry's funeral months ago. Quiet, unsure, half buried under the weight of silence. That version didn't live here anymore. This one did. Some payments aren't made in dollars. They're made in distance, silence, and finally, peace. By late March, Boston had finally exhaled. Cherry blossoms unfurled along the esplanade, delicate and defiant against the last gasps of winter. I walked the familiar path from Charles Street, past the old stone bookstore Henry used to frequent, now shuttered and faded. The brass bell above the door hadn't chimed in years, but in my memory, it still rang, soft and sure, each time he held the door open for me. The court ruling came that morning. Miles had called, his voice calm as always, but even he allowed himself a pause before delivering the outcome. The probate judge accepted all submitted evidence. Henry's original will has been reinstated. You've been awarded 70% of the estate. I'd nodded, even though he couldn't see me. And the rest? 10% split between your parents. Lindsay gets 20. The court cited familial history and charitable intent in Henry's prior giving. It's fair. It was. Maybe not emotionally, but legally, yes. Rachel, he added, this doesn't need to be the end, but it can be your start. I thanked him, hung up, sat at my kitchen counter with the letter still warm from the envelope. No tears, no vindication, just stillness. By noon, the calls started. First came the unknown number, Elaine's voice, clipped and distant. Rachel, now that things are clearer, perhaps we could sit down and discuss logistics. We're still family. Then David, a terse voicemail, his tone like gravel. We don't have to make this uglier than it already is. You've made your point. I didn't return the calls. Instead, I sent one message, plain text, no greeting. The terms are public. So is the silence. That was all. I wasn't angry anymore. Just done. The next morning, I finalized the paperwork to establish the Henry Morgan Scholarship for Ethical Leadership in Medicine. It wasn't in my name. That was never the point. Henry had always believed legacy was less about who you remembered and more about what you enabled others to become. I used a portion of my inheritance to fund the program. The rest, I placed in a managed trust. No family names attached, no signatures shared, just structure and stewardship. Quiet strength, the way Henry would have wanted. That weekend, I drove out to Sleepy Hollow Cemetery in Concord. Henry's grave rested beneath a blooming dogwood tree. Wind played gently through the petals, scattering them across the path like pieces of a softer story. I sat for a while, coffee in hand. Black, one sugar, just the way he liked it. I took the pocket watch from my coat. The metal was warm against my palm, familiar now. I knelt, set it on the stone for a moment, let the tick echo into the quiet. Then I picked it back up. I wasn't ready to leave it behind. Maybe I never would be. Maybe legacy wasn't about leaving something. It was about carrying it forward with intention. As I stood, I turned toward the city skyline, peeking through branches, and breathed in the scent of spring. I passed by Henry's Corner Roast on my way home. The small cafe still stood proudly on the corner of Boylston and Arlington, its window etched with the same curling script. Inside, someone was grinding beans, and the air smelled like warmth and resilience. I stepped in, ordered a cup, and sat by the window. For the first time in months, I wasn't bracing for the next blow. I wasn't checking my phone, waiting for some new twist. some final word. I simply was. And that, I realized, was the final payment. Not of bitterness, not of revenge, but of release. Not every tie has to be cut. Some simply stop being pulled. And some ropes, you just stop picking them up. I didn't walk away from this battle with bitterness. Just a lighter bag and a clearer heart. Maybe what I truly inherited from Grandpa Henry wasn't the estate, but the ability to end a chapter with clarity instead of chaos. Some families teach us that love isn't automatic. It's something you choose to protect through honesty and grace. And if we can't control how others treat us, we can still choose how we care for ourselves. If this story made you think of a relative, a boundary, or a moment you struggled with, I hope you know you're not alone. Feel free to share your thoughts below. Sometimes your story might just be the comfort someone else needs, and if you believe in quiet strength, in stories that grow slowly but strike deep, subscribe to the channel because sometimes the most powerful journeys are the ones no one saw coming.